Hello, chemistry students. Today we are going over the IB lab report. This lab report is designed based off of what you will be expected to do for your internal assessment, which is part of your final exam for this course. Please note that your lab report, as written on this slide, cannot exceed 14 pages. Now, that may sound like a lot right now, but trust me, when you see all of the different sections, you'll see how you can very quickly get up to that number of pages. All right, so let's start with what the very first page of your lab report should look like. It should be a title page consisting of the title of your lab report, your name, and the date you are submitting the report, and that's it. That is the only thing that should be on the title page. And then you should move on to the next page for the next part of the lab report. That next part being the research question. Your research question should be focused and concise, no more than 2 sentences. It should encompass the entire purpose of this lab for your reader, and it should imply both the independent and the dependent variables in that short 1 to 2 sentences. So make sure you address both of them. Next, we're going to go over what these variables are. You should already know this, but just as a reminder, your independent variable is the variable that you as the scientist are actively changing during your experiment. Your dependent variable is going to be what you are measuring and is responding to what you are doing to the independent variable. And then finally, it is very important to have as many controlled variables as possible. These are the things that should be staying constant and not changing, because otherwise we don't know if it's actually the independent variable or one of your not controlled variables that is causing the changes in the dependent variable. Next is going to be your introduction. Your introduction is your personal reasons for why you are doing the lab. Why do you care about answering your research question? This is the only place in the entire lab report where you are allowed to use first person I, me pronouns, and it should be roughly 1 to 2 paragraphs in length. The next section is your background. Your background should provide all of the chemistry knowledge necessary to understand your experiment. Trust me when I say this, you want to define every single chemistry-related term that you use at any point in your experiment. Expect that you are writing this as though the people reading it have absolutely no knowledge of chemistry. Be as explicit and specific as possible, and it should be a minimum of 3 to 4 paragraphs. This is usually the longest part of your lab report where the bulk of your writing is going to be. From here, you can move on to your procedure. Make sure that you list all of the equipment you need to run your experiments, including the sizes. So don't just tell me that you are using a beaker. Specify, is it a 100 milliliter beaker? Is it a 600 milliliter beaker? Things like that. Describe your experiment step by step, so it should be 1, 2, 3 format. Include any pictures or graphics that you need in order to better represent your experiment, and make sure you label them something like figure 1, figure 2, and so on. And lastly, and most importantly, record any safety concerns for any material you are using at any point in your experiment, and tell me how they will be disposed of when your lab concludes. Next, we're going to move on to the analysis. So your analysis should be where your data tables go, and it should include both quantitative and qualitative data, not just one. Give me one example of any calculations that you require. So for example, if you took an average of your trials, show me an average for one of the numbers. For the rest of the averages, you can just give me the number you calculated, but I do need one example calculation for any sort of formula that you have to use. Make sure you're keeping track of your significant figures, and include any possible graphs, as these make it a lot easier to understand your data than data tables. And this section right here is the reason why it can actually be hard to stay under that 14-page limit, because if you have a bunch of graphs, Usually you can only fit 2 to 3 on a page and you quickly start eating up space. Now we're going to talk about your conclusion. So your conclusion should explain any trends you see in the data, and specifically, what do those trends mean in regards to your research question? You should state the answer to your research question that ties directly to your data. You should also be comparing your results to accepted values, which can usually be found in your IB data booklet. And finally, you should cite any source that you use for your reference, such as when you are comparing your results to those accepted values. As a result, your conclusion should be about 1 to 2 pages minimum. It can be longer, but you can usually get most of the information you need in those 2 paragraphs. Then we have your evaluation. The expectations for your evaluation is you should be addressing any errors that you might have encountered in the experiment. You should be identifying whether each error impacted your accuracy or your precision or both. You should always be making suggestions for how to fix these errors. And you should additionally suggest additional ways you could improve and expand upon this experiment if asked to repeat it in the future. And finally, the last part of your lab report is going to be your works cited page. Please make sure that you include any sources that you have used. If you looked up an example procedure online, if you referred to the textbook, your notes, anything at all, make sure it's included in your works cited. For a regular experiment, you should have 1 to 2 sources. When we get to the internal assessment, you should have at minimum 5 sources. IB does not have a specific requirement for how to cite your sources, but I recommend using MLA format. And that is we don't need alternative resources. That is the IB lab report. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I would be happy to help. Thanks, guys, and good luck on writing up your IB level lab report. Take care.